So like a good logistician, I'll have to deliver on time at 6 o'clock because nobody wants to stand between an audience and a cocktail reception. Okay, so thank you for coming back so promptly. We're now moving on to a very different subject from the previous one. Thanks to Priska and the previous panel for setting a very high benchmark for us to reach. So the subject now is on the environmental sustainability of supply chains and logistics. And I thought to introduce the subject, I would just show 3 slides to help us scope the subject and also to define some of the terms. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, declared back in 2015, 17 of them altogether, and surprisingly, none of them specifically relates to transport and logistics. And this was mentioned at the time, and the response was that they felt logistics and transport were so fundamental to all of those 17 SDGs that there was no need to have a separate one for logistics. But if you look at the literature in this subject, particularly the academic literature, the classification that tends to be used is the triple bottom line, distinguishing the economic, social and environmental dimensions of the subject. Now, Priska earlier raised the subject of social sustainability. We're not going to say very much specifically about the economic aspects of sustainability, but the focus in this session is going to be on the the environmental dimension. I thought it would maybe be useful to have a photo mosaic to help us visualize the amount of damage that logistical activities do to the environment. Sadly, it's a rather dirty activity. Mainly because of freight transport operations. You can see illustrations there of the pollution, but there are other things. There's noise, there are accident levels, there's the impact on biodiversity, for example. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, there are the invisible impacts on the environment, particularly for 2 pollutants. One is nitrogen dioxide and the second is CO2. And certainly taking a European perspective on this subject, by far the dominant environmental effect, or negative externality as we could call it, is climate change. I give lots of presentations on how we decarbonise logistics, and I always like to begin with some of the climate science. And the climate science currently is very worrying. I mean, what we're seeing is an acceleration of the rate of global warming. You can visualize that in many different ways. Last year, for the first time, average global temperature rose above the 1.5 degree limit, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that really has to be the limit to minimize the risk of us crossing climatic tipping points. So unfortunately, last year, we breached that 1.5 degree limit, and that has deeply concerned climate scientists. So one very distinguished climate scientist at the University of Reading in the UK, a guy called Ed Hawkins, said this. He found the latest climate data surprising, astounding, staggering, bewildering, flabbergasting, disquieting. I mean, all of these English words which give you a sense of just how alarmed climate scientists are about what is happening. So that's the bigger picture. Let's then relate that to transport and logistics. So it's estimated that transport operations worldwide represent just under a quarter of energy-related CO2 emissions. And then if we look at where those transport-related CO2 emissions are coming from, one thing you discover is that the biggest share is coming from Asia-Pacific countries. About 31% of transport CO2 from this region. Okay, that's twice as much as comes from Europe, for example. Now that is both passenger and freight transport, but if we simply look at freight transport, about 56% of those emissions from the Asia-Pacific region come from freight transport. Now that is a very high percentage. For the world as a whole, freight accounts for only about 42% of emissions. So you would expect, as a result of that, there would be a lot of policy attention, public policy attention, to the freight aspects of decarbonisation here in the Asia-Pacific region. But that is not the case. I have just authored a report for the International Transport Forum, where I look at the decarbonisation of freight transport, particularly in Southeast Asia and also Central Asia. And when you review the literature, what you discover is that most of the attention is currently being paid to passenger transport rather than to freight transport. Indeed, one study I read from the Council for Decarbonising Transport in Asia went so far as to say that freight is the neglected child of transport decarbonisation. So anyway, this afternoon, we're going to find a home for this neglected child because this is going to be the theme of our discussions this afternoon. So we're going to look at freight transport. We're going to look more generally at logistics systems and also extend the scope even a bit further to look at supply chains. And to help us do that, we've got a really great panel of old friends and new friends as well. So I'd like to invite them to the stage, and then we'll start to discuss this subject. We've only got 5 panellists this time, unlike Priska, who had 6. But sadly, our gender balance is unfortunate. We only have 1 lady. Okay. Wow, yeah, you are the star. Yes. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us. If I just introduce everyone. So there's Linh Duong, who is Vietnamese, but works at a university in the UK. So although I am a KLU professor, as you gathered from my accent, I'm actually British. I live in Scotland. And as something I don't often admit, because I've been working for 12 years in Hamburg and commuting by air, I've made about 200 flights across the North Sea. So I'm what you call a carbon hypocrite. My personal carbon footprint is enormous. Okay, but let's not go there. Okay, so thank you for joining us. So Lynn is at the Bristol Business School at the University of the West of England. And it was quite fortuitous. You happened to be in Vietnam, and so were able to join us. And much of his research is on sustainable supply chains and resilience. Okay, thank you. Second, we have Mark Goh, Professor of Supply Chain Management at the National University of Singapore. I have known Mark for 10 years, longer, possibly. More than that, yeah. We used to sit on a council for the World Economic Forum that... Oh yeah, thank you. That focused on supply chain and logistics. So great to have you on the panel. Then we have Tu Anh, is that right? Who's one of our 2 industry representatives on the panel from the company called Guardian, which is a retailer of cosmetics. Is that right? Health and beauty products with 120 shops in, plus a big online retail operation as well. So thank you for coming, represent. Then we have DHL represented on the panel. And this is where I struggle to get your name correct. I can just call you Dennis. Is that right? Dennis Mukanovic? Was that okay? Right. We are so grateful to Dennis because he has stepped in at the last moment. One of the panelists notified us yesterday that she wasn't able to attend. So Dennis, who just happened to fly yesterday from Singapore, has agreed to join our panel. So thank you very much, particularly as DHL is a world leader, really, in logistics decarbonisation. So Dennis is the VP for procurement of IT services for the Asia-Pacific region. So great. Thank you for joining us. And then finally, Ruth Banam-Yong, who is a professor of transportation and logistics in Thammasat University in Thailand. I actually examined his PhD in 2001. That's right. And he has gone on to have a hugely successful academic career and also business career and political career. I mean, you're also chairman of the advisory council to the Ministry of Commerce in Thailand. And he's actually just returned from the Cannes Film Festival. So we've got a real celebrity on the stage here. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is we each make a short statement, maybe outlining how sustainable supply chain relates to yourself as an academic researcher or as a business manager as well. So, Lynn, would you be willing to start?
Yeah, there you go. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lin. I'm a senior lecturer in strategy and operation management at the University of the West of England in the UK. My research focus on sustainability and resilience, and particularly I'm focusing more on decarbonization. I focus on the food industry, healthcare industries, and I also focus more on the collaboration with the public organizations, because for me, my personal view is that these targets we can only achieve with the support from the public organization. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, hi. I'm not going to say so many words. I think we should best leave all these words to Alan, okay? Yeah, but just suffice to say that I also wear another hat, apart from being at a business school. I'm also running the research at the Logistics Institute, Asia Pacific, right? So this way, we do a lot of stuff on supply chain and sustainability, in particular, looking at emissions. If you're interested in the stuff that I do, go read my latest piece of work in the journal called Sustainability, where I looked at corporate performance and the effects of doing good, rather doing well by doing good, so to speak. Yeah.
My name is Du An. I'm supply chain manager at retailer. First, green retailer is our dream, our new dream, and what we are trying to achieve. Now we are, after chasing the eco-friendly product, plant-based product, now we are trying to find how to reduce the emissions and build a friendly, eco-friendly store for the customer and for environment.
Yes, DHL, Dennis Mekanovic, and I think for us it's important to also look from different perspectives at how we can achieve sustainability. For me personally, sustainability is really interesting in looking how circularity and also how we can purchase and also push our vendors in the IT and technology industry to become more sustainable, but also at the same time to look at innovative solutions in the realm of sustainability.
Thank you. Oh, my sound is very, very loud. No, just wanted to say basically I think two things. From a research perspective, I just had a publication out in PPC, in fact in terms of sustainability for humanitarian supply chains. So because we know that in humanitarian supply chains there's lots of issues in terms of going in and helping the people, so on and so forth. But now we need to think, how do we make this humanitarian supply chain sustainable also, and looking at some of the measures, how you can actually assess the sustainability. And this is really my area of research in terms of performance assessment, be it in terms of cost, time, reliability, and now from a sustainability perspective. Another thing I would like to share is, in my line of work, Alan was referring to my political job, so I do a lot of policy work, and I've been involved like with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in terms of developing their master plan for transport and helping them. And one of the observation I have is that in this current master plan, there is a section on environmental issues for transport. The only problem is it was added at the last minute. So the challenge is, how do we in fact integrate the environmental consideration from the beginning of the master plan instead of becoming an add-on after everything else has been put in?
Great. Well, thank you for those introductions. I mean, I'm looking at the subject very much from a sort of European perspective, and I'm wondering to what extent businesses in this part of the world are actually engaging with the environmental agenda. I mean, some of you have experience of other parts of the world. Lynn, for example, you also work in the UK. Ruth, you've done work in many different parts of the world. I mean, do you think that in this region that companies are playing a full role in trying to green their operations, or do you feel they're falling behind, maybe companies in other parts of the world? Any sense of how things compare? Anybody would like to take?
Well, I think, Alan, that's a very good question. I mean, I've worked with a fair bit of companies over the last few years, in particular on aspects related to sustainability, like what you were talking about. And one of the things I find is that many a time is the companies with Asian headquarters, if you like, but European-based, when driving the agenda, right? And the biggest challenge that they have here is how do we adapt, right? And how do we implement some of these things? Because there's a lot of what we call tokenism, isn't it? That's one aspect of it. But the good news is that over the last 24 months, I think the activity has stepped up somewhat, and local companies are getting more interested in this area. And I remember years ago, there was this organization called Green Freight Asia, if you recall it, right? And they were trying to start, they had a lot of roadblocks, but now more and more are accepting the need to be friendlier to the environment, to look after our environment for a simple reason. We don't want to be caught in things like the clear air turbulence. Yep, so that kind of things. But the challenge, of course, is here. How do we actually, measure what we are doing? And that's where I can share an example with you guys. Very similar to your industry, actually. This is a travel retail cosmetic company, right? And they were trying to understand this big issue of how do they do Scope 3 emissions? Big thing, okay? And I tell you, Alan, one of the things we found, and that's something you're guilty of, and that is that if you travel by air, you are guilty. First thing, okay? If you travel by air on business class, you're doubly guilty because the rate of emission is double the amount, literally, right? So then they found that rule of thumb. After that, as an outcome, as a decision, they said, okay, let's tell our guys within the Asia Pac, let's not travel, everybody go on Zoom, right? But someone forgot. And the issue that they forgot was this: how do we measure emissions through Zoom? And well, what's the cost of emissions on Zoom? Someone forgot about that, so we kept quiet. And after that, we came up to another interesting research question for them to think about. And that is, why kill yourself to measure Scope 3 emissions when, if you want to look at the serious part of it, the end-to-end global supply chain, that it's not going to be easy to actually measure Scope 3, right? Alan, we had this discussion, I think, yesterday. Right, so we talk about the next thinking, and that's where the thought leadership came in and say, let's look at Scope 4, and that's what we talk about, avoidable emissions, right? Yeah, and so what are we doing to avoid the thing, to avoid us from creating the scene, creating the crime, right? That kind of thing. So I thought, nice, yeah. So that's our next agenda.
Yeah, great. So for the benefit of those of you in the audience who maybe are not familiar with the concept of Scope 3 emissions, Scope 1 emissions are the ones that directly come from a company's own operations. Scope 2 would relate to electricity-related emissions, and then Scope 3 is everything else. So it's emissions from a company's upstream supply chains, or if it outsources its logistics, that also would be classed as Scope 3. Maybe we'll come back and talk about Scope 3 later on, because when we move to look at how companies are decarbonising their whole supply chain, then the way you measure Scope 3 emissions becomes fairly critical. So thanks for raising that issue. You mentioned a Scope 4. And maybe there's a Scope 5. Oh, no, but I've invented one, which is where we have to remove the CO2 that is already in the atmosphere, because we're already overshooting all our carbon budgets. And so to be carbon neutral by 2040 or 2050, we are going to have to remove billions of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. I'm actually going to be talking about that tomorrow because I'm giving a keynote address. So, but I just thought I'd raise that issue at this point as well. Is there a corporate view on what Mark has just been saying? Does DHL, for example, have I mean, you're a global business, so presumably you're trying to green your operations equally around the world, or are your efforts a bit more intensive in some places than in others?
That's a good question, actually. I think starting from that, of course, there's different product lines across the globe. There is, being a German company, of course, have focused a lot of the first products we developed in green logistics for the European market, because that's where the acceptance was higher, and also the acceptance of higher prices was higher. The target of actually having a completely green supply chain is still global and has to be global, right, regardless of that. And this starts from actually offering green products, developing new green products, seeing how we can actually make parts of the supply chain greener using, for example, sustainable aviation fuels, alternative fuels, EV vehicles, but also if you just mentioned Scope 4, I'm not sure if it completely fits into it, but one of the things we have realized is that a lot of CO2 is actually bound in a lot of our old buildings because the way it was produced. So we have a strong commitment to all of our new built buildings, and which are owned by DHL, are 100% carbon neutral. So we're actually looking at the materials we're using for them, and we're highly committed to use carbon neutral materials, local materials as much as possible, so that we actually reduce also the carbon emissions with the logistical ways and the pathways we have to take. And we're also applying as much as possible alternative energy sources, for example solar panels, onto our roofs so that we can run warehouses almost autonomous.
What proportion of your corporate emissions would then come from the buildings as opposed to from your transport operations? Do you have that figure readily available?
I can't tell you the figure, but the target is that actually the warehouse operations, the energy used in the warehouses, is completely coming from alternative energy sources, most of them actually from solar panels and wind turbines and everything what we can use given the premises.
And then just picking up on the point you made about sustainable aviation fuel, can you find enough of it currently?
No.
No, okay.
We would love to. Love to. SAF is, I think, one of the hottest topics we can see in that area today. We're working with, I would say, all the market leaders to actually find more sources, actually also hedge as much as possible, because DHL owning 4 airlines, we are really interested in driving this forward. But the reality is it's a very difficult topic at this moment.
And Anne, what are the sort of environmental challenges that you're facing within your company?
Okay, so to answer your question, is this question, why we have to do that? Which is the motivation for SME company to do the green environment, green business? Why we have to do that? So in general, there are just three main motivation, which is why we have to do. The first is that the tax from Europe of carbon. Now, if the company, we are mostly, MSC in Vietnam is a supplier of Europe and US company. So that motivates us to change. Otherwise, we will lose our competitive with other suppliers around the world. And the second motivation is to keep our reputation. So you can see that mostly the company, the listing company in the stock market, they all have ESG committee. And the rest of company, I think that around 50% of the rest, they have agenda from 2 to 4 years. But when we talk about green to the CEO, the question again, why we have to do that? So the motivation for them is to optimize the activity, to reduce energy cost, and to have getting more profits. So that's why they cut the agenda from 2 to 4 years. On the 5th year, they're waiting for the learning curve of solar, of SAF, of green energy. When the investment cost is lower, then they start thinking about that.
Something you were telling me over lunch was that your online operation, to maximize your market share, you're providing almost instantaneous delivery to your customers. Is that right? Delivering lipstick within a few hours to increase your market share. There must be an environmental cost associated with such rapid delivery. Would that be true?
Yeah, it is. Talking about e-commerce, there are 2 pain points. The first is that transportation, and the second that is wrapping material. So those are 2 pain points, too much plastic. And we give that into the discussion that we sell into Gen Z. We talk about Gen Z this day, and now they have awareness about the green. But what we see is that it's just a trend. It's just a trend. It's just a lifestyle. Into action, we have truly 2 trends of the new generation. The first is that they want to catch up with the new trend as fast as possible. Anything hot in TikTok last night, they want it immediately. And because they want to change their collection of lipstick year by year, day by day, they prefer a small size of product. Now we come into the third difficulty of health and beauty is how to collect the lipstick case, the case of Shiseido, right? You want the circular economy. Now you need to recall all the packaging, the product packaging, and that's the challenge. And because they want to catch up with the trend immediately, and the competition of e-commerce is very high, so they want to have the product immediately, 2 hours or 1 hour after placing the order. Why? Because they want to post this on Facebook. Facebook immediately, right now, I cannot wait. I want to catch up with the trend. And secondly, because of the very competition among retailers, so we need to deliver immediately to customer. Otherwise, you see that customer in Vietnam in general are very price sensitive. Right after they place the order, they see some promotion, even 5 or 3% lower, they will cancel order immediately and place a new order. So that is pressure for the company to do that, and it also have the pressure of the company to want to reduce the CO2 emission. Yeah.
Yeah, Ruth, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just to go back to this overall question in how in Southeast Asia we're looking at the environment and how we're becoming more green. I think one thing we must not forget is that countries in Southeast Asia, our main markets are Europe, North America, and the Far East. And in fact, it's driven by the customers. So if we don't comply, then we cannot sell abroad. So we might say that we're receiving pressure, and now, yes, companies in the stock market need to have the ESG, so on and so forth. But what is, I think from my observation perspective, is even though the countries themselves have signed like the various COP, but they haven't really developed any specific policy. It's not policy driven. It's not like in Europe, excuse me if I understand correctly, but it's not policy driven, top down, saying, oh, you have to do it like this. No, it's customer driven. And because it's customer-driven, maybe we don't see it as much, we don't hear about it as much, but if you talk to any exporters, any suppliers, they will say their biggest challenge at the moment is how to comply with all those environmental requirements, the CBAM that is coming, and all these things that is coming, because they still want to sell abroad.
Yeah, that's true. I sometimes feel that because logistics is often so efficient and so fast, what it does, it cultivates unsustainable consumption. You know, we're making it so easy for consumers to behave in an unsustainable way, and that happens at a local level in terms of last mile logistics, but also happens at a global level in terms of exports. Lynn, did you want to add something?
So in terms of that, I want to add something like, in your slide, one of your slides, you mentioned that the contribution of the carbon emission is mostly from Asia Pacific. But we have to be very specific in the term that why? Because in Asia Pacific, they produce the products for all the world. And the freight, the carbon emission in the freight is mostly maybe from Asia Pacific to the other world. So it's not like the company in the Asia Pacific, they don't want to focus on the environmental green, but they also had to focus on the consumer. They had to meet the demand from consumer. And also, customer can say a lot of things about the environmental. They try to be more responsibility. In my sustainable procurement class, so students talk a lot about become a green customers. But then I asked them, have you ever visit or buy anything last month? Buy any clothes last month? They said yes. And the next question, you think about environment when you make that buying decision? No one saying that yes. So customer thing is one thing, but then when they make the decision is another thing. Of course, the EU, they just passed a law, EU Supply Chain Act, to push for more large company to focus on environment. But there's a lot of, we need to maybe change the consumer behavior first to push for the company. Yeah.
Let me pick up on his point and also touch base with Anne and Ruth's point. I thought they were very interesting because we seem to be tying down to something and coming to a convergence. Right? For your point, I guess it's interesting because here the supply chain exists for one reason only, and that is for the consumer. isn't it? Without the consumer, then there's nothing to talk about. That's the first thing we have to understand. But unfortunately, our consumer these days, they're measured in terms of generations, but the generation that we measure them, or the world measures them by, is no more in the range of 30, 40 years, but it's in the range of 15 years. So what does that mean? It means that your Gen Z, whatever you call them, right, they're not going to last beyond 15 years, because today we're not even talking about Gen Z anymore. We're talking about Generation Alpha. And you say, what in the world is that? It basically tells you there's another start of another generation to come. And the bad news is this: the generations are going to get shorter and shorter. So what does that mean? It means that the emphasis for demand, like what you were talking about, and will only increase. That they see something online, they're very good at, much faster than us. All right, they see something online and they want it straight away. Why? Not because they want it, but because they want to tell their friends, "I've got it." True? Right? And they post it on TikTok, and the next thing you know, was a whole sensation around it. And then what happens? The poor logistics provider have to then run through the whole process and say, let's deliver. But they forget one thing. When they deliver, what's the cost of delivery? Single package. DHL, of course, will be very happy, isn't it? They're not going to complain. But someone up there complains and say, look, I can't see you guys now. It's too much CO2 in the air between you and me. Right? No. What's the cost of packaging? Nobody knows. Seriously. And I look at some of this stuff. I studied one organization, which in this case was, right, for those of you in Vietnam, we probably know it only too well. Right, I studied their packaging process during COVID-19. Nothing else to do, isn't it? Right, so I was very happy, stay at home, looked at it, right, I studied the whole process. I tore it apart, then I told them, you did all these things wrong. So they actually employed the guy and they changed a lot of those things. But one thing they did not change was the cost of packaging. Imagine, you sell a product for 10 cents, but what's the cost of packaging? The cost of packaging, including the platform fees and everything, came up to about 50 cents, right? Which is very similar to what you're talking about. Very cheap product, 10 cents, even though it's totally marked down. Then after I ask the next question, where does the packaging materials, the used ones, where do they go? That comes back to Dennis' point about the safe aviation fuel. One of the challenges is this: we created very well a supply chain network which can go forward to reach to the customers as much as possible. But where's the return? We talk about circular economy, but I'll tell you this: circular is only good at the institutional level, at the firm level sometimes, but at the individual level, there's no circularity. Why? Because we are a use and dispose generation. Right? That's what it is. I did two pieces of work. One, of course, is with one of the panelists was sitting here just now. Right, his company, it was in Indonesia. Another one was with another CPG company in the Philippines. And they all had the same problem: how to manage the returns of single-use plastics. The sachets, right? I tell you, it's just too expensive. Yeah, so we told them, please don't produce in plastic. So we can't. Why? Because Indonesia got 17,700 islands. So the Philippines got 7,700 islands or so. So if you don't have that, we have no business, no market share. Oh, then you look at it and say, there's two sides to the coin. One, the environment. The other one, the commercial. That's what Ruth is talking about, right? So at the end of the day, how do we educate people? How do we change that mindset? So over to you, Alan.
Okay, yeah, you were depressing me there in describing all of these consumer trends going the wrong way. So how do we curb that? Various options. One is visibility. So you put carbon labels on products and then hope that people will allow that to influence their buying behavior. Or you use monetary mechanisms. We have carbon pricing so that the externalities are then factored into the final selling price. Are these practical suggestions? And would they work if we did these things? Anybody got a view? Yeah.
I think it works. So for example, in the UK, they charge 10p for a plastic bag at the supermarket, and just 10p is just a small things, but then just make people try to avoid using the plastic bag. But these things, I think, this just happened because we had a policy, so that might help. Yeah.
And that did work. I mean, that reduced the number of plastic bags by 90% as well. But that's a very small part of the environmental problem. So do you think, I don't know, next 10 years we'll see carbon pricing or carbon labeling having an influence on consumer behavior? Yeah, you think so?
I think just to give you a bit of an insight, I think the countries themselves are struggling. They're talking about carbon credit, carbon pricing, trading mechanism, but they're still completely lost. They talk about it, they like to talk about it, but when we really go down into the operationalization of it, we don't actually know where to start and how to actually calculate. There's lots of tools to help us measure carbon emission, end to end. And we've trialed this type of tool. It works. It tells us how much comes out of it. But then how do we put it back into the cost? Because if you talk, for example, to a trucker, for him, we talked to him about the environment. He said, yeah, he totally agrees. It's very nice. But you just change the truck from Euro 3, Euro 4 to Euro 5 or Euro 6. He's already complaining. Why? Because there's a $10,000 increase in the price of the truck. So yes, he likes the world. He wants the world to be green. But anything that touches upon his cost, then he's not happy. So he's really looking at it more from a, let's just comply. And the innovation may not be there. So probably some sort of innovative schemes would be needed. And maybe this is something that us, I would say in Southeast Asia, we can't do it on an individual basis, and maybe we need to work with ASEAN at the bigger stage with the 10 countries, because each of the countries have different challenges.
And of course, the other problem here is the high degree of fragmentation in the trucking industry. In every country in the world, you get huge numbers of very small operators, all desperately competing. It's as close as you get, I think, to perfect competition, working on small margins. And so their priority is to survive as a business, even if that means you're not particularly green. But question for you, Dennis, on this theme, because obviously you've got procurement responsibilities, and DHL subcontracts a lot of its transport. So in that subcontracting process, I mean, how much importance is attached to the environmental performance of the small trucking companies that you use?
If you would have asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said probably like nothing, close to nothing. That's the reality. Most of the trucks we're seeing around the world are diesel engines. If you follow the EU guidelines, diesel engines are the worst thing you can do. If you look at other sources, you might dispute that. And the reality is, most of these transportation companies are literally like a person in a truck. And we see this from a completely different perspective as well. It's a lot of people actually own one truck, run it as a family business, right? They, especially like also in Southeast Asia, but also in Southern Europe and Latin America, we see people actually using transportation companies as a step up towards, coming out of a lower class into the middle class business, because they're like their own boss. There is actually an opportunity to create a living. Putting extremely high burdens onto these kind of companies is very difficult, because it comes at a price, right? If you just tell someone who managed to save 30, 40, 50,000 euros to buy a truck, okay, now you have to like increase your compliance with Euro norms, with these kind of like norms, for like another 10, 15,000 euros, it's detrimental to their business. And they have to make up these kind of like externalities with either higher costs, which might make them less competitive, or they just go out of business. And that's what we've seen during COVID, right? It's becoming more and more. That's the reality. It is an incredibly important part of our journey to have all of our partners as compliant as possible, contributing to our green journey. Is this the main contribution we are requesting from each and every one? No, because we're also aware of what we can do and what we can't do.
And just while you have the microphone, your procurement responsibilities are IT related, aren't they? Because many people think that digitalization of our logistics systems and supply chains will yield carbon savings. Is that your view in terms of, I mean, how digitalization is transforming freight markets worldwide? Is there a carbon benefit in that process?
It depends, right? There is digitalization for the sake of digitalization, which is, don't quote me here, but it's bullshit. Because there is a lot of things where you just do it as a token of, okay, we are quick, we're innovative, we are going to the market. Some of them are interesting, and we don't know what the outcome is. It might work, it might not work. And a lot of innovation and digitalization also, not talking digitization, really digitalization is really about trying to figure out what's the next big thing. And in the beginning, we perhaps thought it's a great idea to have drones, but there is a lot of limitations and a lot of red tape around it, so it doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of other examples where it actually makes sense to have digitalization in these innovations. Are we going to find a magic pill to solve all of the carbon emissions we have out there? No, definitely not. Will it help us to determine where we find carbon emissions, for example, along the supply chain by applying digital twins? Yeah, maybe. Utilizing IoTs to actually find failure systems earlier than it actually breaks down, applying efficient spare part logistics, applying smart ways in city logistics to reduce carbon emissions, absolutely. That's definitely a thing. But digitalization for the digitalization's sake and applying AI everywhere doesn't make any sense, because just coming back to the topic of Scope 3, also your Zoom session costs carbon emissions. Also sending emails costs carbon emissions. Running massive farms, so one of my suppliers is Microsoft. They have massive issues to make their carbon emissions coming down because they have so many data centers around the world which require a lot of cooling, and cooling costs electricity. And unless you put it somewhere into the Antarctic or into Sweden, what they're actually currently doing to reduce the cost of electricity and the usage of electricity, the carbon emissions go up. And that's because everyone is using ChatGPT for their cooking recipe for tonight.
Yes. No, that's a good point. But I think some of these big IT companies are actually supporting the development of carbon sequestration these days in the hope that they will get carbon credits for that. But I take your point, because in a sense that these are invisible emissions.
Yeah.
You know, they're in server farms in other countries, so we're not aware of the energy consumption and the emissions that they cause.
Perhaps to make it more tangible, right? I mean,
exactly.
Each and every one has a laptop or a mobile phone. And I think one of the big topics my team and I are currently focusing on is about circularity of assets. Being the biggest logistics company in the world, 600,000 people, we're managing thousands and millions actually of assets. What are we doing with these assets, right? And the best way to reduce carbon emissions is to not create them, right? And if you can actually bring your assets into a second life cycle, if you can extend the life cycle of your assets, that's reducing and avoiding carbon emissions. Yeah. So we are working with partners to basically bring circularity into all the laptops, into all the mobile phones we have, to also have a localized recycling where we actually get the carbon credits and also some benefits out of it. But it's also a good thing for the local economies, right? And this is definitely a topic where we're really focusing. The circular solutions was for the longest time kind of like a buzzword, but now we actually try to put really everything into practice.
Yeah. Because you mentioned circularity, and again, if you look at some of the academic literature in this area, it suggests if we make our economies more circular, we will actually dampen the growth of freight movement. Because if you're reusing and remanufacturing products, it's not generating as much freight transport as if you're sourcing raw materials and going through the whole production process. I'm a bit skeptical about that personally. I don't know if other people have a view on that. There's an institute that promotes circularity in the economy, and this is one of the benefits they claim, that it will actually economize on transport. But do you think there's a connection between circularity and freight transport demand? Yeah, Ruth?
I remember I was doing this exercise for an institute, public organization in Thailand, and talking about circularity and saying, okay, if we wanted to have a circular economy in the country, because at that time the Prime Minister was very vocal about it, yes, we need to have, what's really the first step if you want to operationalize it? And then I went through some of the literature, did a number of focus group, and the people in the focus group from the private sector said to me, well, at least the starting point is have a good reverse logistics system so that it can come back. Because if you don't have reverse logistics, then it will not come back. So that's the starting point. And then after that, you can do closed loop supply chain, another buzzword, and then we can have the circular economy. But it really starts from something very basic, which is reverse logistics.
perhaps to make this a bit interactive, reverse logistics is a great topic. Love it. Just going into the audience, how many of you are actually willing to pay for shipping when you order from Amazon, Shopee, and Lazada? Okay, I have 2. How many of you are actually purchasing things when it says your return, in case you don't like it, costs €5, $5, $10? Okay, I have 2. So 2 out of 60, 70 people. So that's exactly the problem. A lot of people like the idea of circularity, but not a lot of people are actually willing to pay for it. And while you make money as a logistics company, and regardless of the color is blue, red, yellow, whatever, you're making money by delivering something from A to B. Taking it back from B to C is usually a cost. And it's not covered by the consumer, and it's like something what we see. It's like if we put this up into the price of like A to B and we have like a contingency on top of it, everybody's going to complain, because then you're kind of increasing the total market, and you're penalizing actually the customer who are just ordering the stuff they need.
Yeah. Adding on this point, is a very interesting point from hand beauty. There's a lot of lady here. I just want to ask that all of you have lipstick, right? Who have lipstick, please raise your hand. Okay, nice. Okay, good question. Guys, all you question, yeah. Yeah, my boyfriend used lipstick also. So any of you have the lipstick that totally only have the case? See?
No hands at all.
See, we know the answer. And that is our difficulty to, when we think about a circular economy in retail, we want to recall all the product packaging. And the first to do that, they need to fully use the product. But some of them want to keep it as a collection. And on the National Cleansing Day, on the Dead Holiday, they all bring it on, throw it on. So we cannot collect them. First is that the behavior of consumer. Then we think about the next step. What if we encourage them? What if we encourage them to do the product to the store, and then we return them the rewarding? Then they can use the rewarding to repurchase the product. So we give a great feedback, willingness from customer to do that. But the next one, that what do we do with the product? We need a cooperation from manufacturer. We need a cooperation from Shiseido, L'Oreal to do that. And the next is they feedback that it's not about the first is that the technology, how to do that, how to recycle it. So there's idea that they use it to bring a new life for the product, that they produce black, brick, everything, but the cost is very high. And the second cost is that those lady doesn't use up their lipstick. And they have costs on removing those lipstick, and it's creating another issue for water. Yeah. And so that is a challenge for retail in a circular economy. Yeah.
Anyway, now you've involved the audience, you've been polling them, let's ask for some questions. Anybody would like to raise their hand and ask a question at this point? Yeah. Nope. Don't be shy. Yes, right at the back, a hand has gone up.
Great
yeah.
lady.
Hello, it's me again. So you guys owe me a question for the previous section, so I just took advantage of this one. What a coincidence that I've just finished my module of CSR last week with CFVG and brought us here today, which is a very insightful sections of sustainability developments. I would like to ask you the question that I asked my professors in my class last week, that it is very small part, is a small portions of sustainability, which is now the whole world are crazed for EV, which is electricity vehicle. We've seen, it's cooled down a bit this year, but still a phenomenal so far. The fact that we're trying to move from diesel to electricity is to decarbonize, to make the world less polluted, and make a climate make hopefully a more impactful on the climate change. But the disturbing fact is that even the whole industry of having EVs, even more polluted than fuels, than fossil diesel. So from the academics point of view, from your professional's point of view, I mean, the insight that you have been taught and been researched for years, what is your opinions?
Okay, so you're suggesting that heavy vehicles, if we convert them to electricity, we have battery-powered
the batteries
ones. You're suggesting they're more polluting than the diesel ones they're replacing?
Yes. Yeah.
What evidence is there for that?
Of course, I mean, this is coming back. This is the question that is coming back to you guys, like,
yes.
Because I heard a lot of companies, governments promoted this electricity vehicles and all of that. Sure. I mean, from my company point of view, the first question I work for IKEA, to be more particularly. Whenever we comes to the company like DHL, my first questions regarding the sustainability is how many percentage of your transportations are made on EV?
Okay, that's fine. I'll direct that question.
But I mean, from the because you guys goes in research and developments and a lot of academics backgrounds on this one. You see, what is your insight of this particular fact? And even moreover, it's becoming a very disturbing for me personally, because it could be changed one day. Like if the whole world are working on EVs, and one day we said, hey, EV is actually more polluted, and we should shift to another one. So what are your insight from this?
Well, I'll give a quick answer, because the research that's been done suggests that the embodied emissions in an EV vehicle, by comparison with a diesel vehicle, can be higher at the point of manufacture. But over the life of the vehicle, because that vehicle will emit an awful lot less CO2 per kilometre, that on a life cycle basis, over the 8, 10, 12-year lifespan of the vehicle, the total emissions will be a lot less. So there's a very strong argument there for moving to these vehicles. But anything my panelists would like to add on that subject? I mean, DHL, what proportion of the DHL truck fleet is currently electrified? Do you know?
The answer to this is difficult, for the simple reason that, is it DHL direct owned fleet? Is it DHL leased fleet? Is it indirect? Because we have also worked for a lot of transportation companies. One of our 2030 targets, not the 2050 targets with the UN targets, but 2030 is to have more than 60% of the last mile fleet electrified. There's like two reasons for that. One of the reasons is supply. Supply right now for last mile vehicles is just not there yet. As a still German-based, German-owned company, we are of course working with like the German-based providers like Volkswagen and Daimler and so on, but of course also with any other companies who are able to provide, which are able to provide us with electric vehicles on the last mile. Right now, we have not found any reliable vendors for the middle and the long distance trucks. That's the reality. If that changes in future, we'll probably expand on that. We are also looking into new providers like Tesla and so on, but right now we have not found any reliable partners who can provide this kind of long distance trucks, what we need, especially also when it comes to the charging infrastructure. It gets like more and more complicated. And then especially it's like a very localized part, right? I don't have any issues finding enough charging infrastructure in the Nordics, where it's very, very advanced. At the same time, if I'm looking into the Philippines, into Indonesia, where we have like lots of small islands, it's incredibly difficult to do that, right? So it really depends on the market, it really depends what you do, but last mile electric vehicles, more than 60%, 2030.
Ruth, did you have a view on this as well?
Yeah, just wanted to share. I also sit on the board of a logistics company, and we currently have a client in Laos. And that client basically produces some sort of recycled wood pellets. And those wood pellets are used, in fact, are sold to Japan to an energy power plant so that they get all the benefit. So the condition for us when we came in to bid was to provide electric vehicles. The challenge is that the distance is about 800 kilometers from the Laotian border up to the seaport in Thailand. So we had to build our own infrastructure for it, the charging station and everything. So I think if we were just a small logistics service provider, we wouldn't have been able to do that. Luckily, we're in the stock market. But then the challenge is this, is that the range is now at about 400 kilometers. And then when we start to calculate the number of trucks we need, because we have to wait at least 2 hours for the fast charging, so in fact it adds even more trucks for us. So it might be good as a showcase, but from a long-term perspective, and I think this is where the company we negotiated quite well, because we have a contract for 8 years. So that means we can put the investment up ahead, and then over time, and also hope that after 3-4 years, the technology for the EV can give us a vehicle that can go 600, 700, 800 kilometers. But at the present moment, it's really to say, showcase, we can do it, but we expect to get benefit really in the last 4 years of the contract.
Because this is also a big problem in Europe at the moment, because the development of a recharging infrastructure is not happening as quickly as people were anticipating. And so this concept of range anxiety, which I've been driving an electric car for 3 years, but that's now extended into the business world, and many trucking companies have got this concern as well. Anyone else got a view on this energy transition to the next generation of low-carbon vehicles, ships, aircraft? Nope.
Otherwise, I would have another question in the public.
Okay, right, okay.
I had one here.
Actually, there's quite a few hands have gone up. That's great. Okay.
Hi, Julian. I'm running a firm specialized in supply chain. We've launched a few years ago a program for carbon emission measures from end to end, scope 3 type of things. The first remark on the previous discussion, long story short, no one really, how to say that nicely, is ready to pay for any of these kind of studies. So I'm not complaining, but there's no traction, there's no incentive for most companies to get into that kind of things. Compliance is just the bare minimum. Getting a bit beyond the requirements, I've not seen it yet. Second, and it's a bit of a perspective I may want your view on. We've done several scope 3 assessment for different companies. One of them is maybe familiar to our local friends. It's called Pizza for Pete. It's a pizza chain, very good pizzas, I recommend. But they have dozens of stores in Vietnam, in India, in Japan. It's quite a sizable companies. They also have farms. They also have their own logistics systems. And just to put the logistics emissions out of the total, it was representing 3% of total emissions. And that's roughly the kind of ratios I've seen in other sectors. It's a very, very small contribution to total emissions. And in this case, what made the difference was the source, was the material, and particularly beef and milk, accounting for 40% of total, including electricity, including commuting, including everything. So it tends to be quite a view that most forget, is just looking at specific areas. Changing our trucks to electric trucks, well, may save a few 0.5%, but will it change the game? Probably not. So I'm just willing to have your view on the supply chain view against the pure logistics view.
Great point. I've been working in logistics decarbonization for many years, and one of the challenges I've had in working with companies is to get their attention, because often the argument is the same one as you've advanced. We've carbon footprinted our business, and logistics is only 3 or 4% of the total. We should really be focusing our attention on production. But it varies a lot by product group, by industry sector. There's a wonderful graph you can find in the World Economic Forum report where it shows you how the percentage of logistics-related emissions varies from sector to sector, and it does vary quite enormously. But that's my answer. Any other reactions to that question? No? Okay, right.
You've got a good question.
No, I think from the academic point of view, your example, your case study is a good example. But the thing is how we can make that good example become a normal example, normal practice. And that's, from my point of view, that is a very good, I appreciate your sharing. I think that we need to investigate more, explore more, to make that become a normal practice for all the companies. So, I think that's good. Yeah.
Sure. Overall, logistics, and that's not just freight transport, that's warehousing and an allowance for the IT aspects of logistics, represent about 12% of CO2 emissions worldwide. So that's the average, across all economic activity. But in the case of shipping, I think shipping is only 2.7% of CO2 emissions worldwide. Aviation is 2.4%. So I suppose it's easy to dismiss these things. But if other sectors, other activities decarbonize faster, then, and logistics doesn't, then steadily its share of emissions will be increasing. Anyway, good intervention. Thank you for that. I think there were some other hands went up as well. I'm not sure what the order was, so I'll leave it to you. Oh, I see.
Yeah. As on your question. So just adding on about the 3% of the carbon emission come from the raw material. We acknowledge that, and that's the reason why recently, years ago in Vietnam, we talk a lot about overconsumption and encourage people to change their meal from a beef lover to vegetarian. That Mr. Tai already mentioned on previous. Yeah, so that's the reason why recently we promoted the product that called plant-based product and like recycled product to prove that all of the ingredients here produce less CO2 rather than other products to encourage customer. But what is the result? Result is that if we produce a plant-based product, the cost is higher. And another study say that the customer willing to pay higher to buy a less carbon emission. The point is that that survey is from European. In Asia, we are very price sensitive again. So the fact showing that even at Guardian, we have the zone called that eco-friendly zone product, price a bit higher, and another is the rest. But performance is not good, even though we are trying to encourage user. So I think that the price sensitive and customer behavior is one of the points to consider on the study. Yeah.
So that's a consumer example of that. Boston Consulting Group every year asks a big sample of heavy users of container shipping how much extra they would be prepared to pay for the use of lower carbon fuel. And every year the percentage increases, right? But then if you compare the amount they're prepared to pay with what the estimates are of the cost of decarbonizing shipping, it's only a very small percentage. So the same principle can apply further back along the supply chain as well. That's a great point. Okay, somebody was going to ask a question. Yeah.
Okay. I will not recycle my question for the first panel. I will come up with a new question, and the question would be to each of you. As we learned from the sustainability topic, it's complex, and we always feel it's difficult to implement. So, what each of you is your personal favorite initiative, solution, which you believe A has a stronger impact than people may think, and the implementation might not be as challenging as we would be afraid of. So maybe we can start from Thailand and then gonna go all the way to Scotland.
So this is an initiative to do what? To cut carbon emissions? Is this?
Yeah, I mean, I want to keep it a bit abstract because I want to see which each of it is just this one idea. You know, if you would be the global minister of sustainability, yeah. So just assumingly you dream that for 5 minutes, what would be the single most impactful initiative idea you personally would love to implement?
probably the closest to being a global leader, so you can start.
Okay, okay. You might not like what I will say, but anyway. So, all of this discussion we're having, the feeling that I have is that we're addressing the symptoms, and we're not really actually addressing the root cause. What is the root cause? Well, the root cause is people. It's us. We are the one who are creating or digging our own hole. So the question is this. I don't know, you saw that movie, the Marvel movie, The Avengers. My favorite character is Thanos. 50%. So now you know how I think. But on a more serious note, is we need to go back and really actually look at the way how we're living today, because we are the source of all that evil that we're all trying to deal with today, this consumer society and everything. How much we can do is another story, because if I start actually doing this, I think I'll be compared to some very famous people in history in the past that people like to hate. But anyway, this is my short answer.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it's exactly that. It's consumer behavior, and it's also like our own behavior, right? And I said it before, right? The best way to avoid carbon emissions is not to create them. And what we see is the complete opposite, right? If you go to Amazon, Amazon will ask you if you have like 5 different things ordered. If you're willing to wait 2 days, you will get one consolidated parcel, and you will get one parcel shipped to your home. Or you can get one part tonight, you get the next part tomorrow, and then the third part in 2 days. The majority of the people will opt for that because they want the first things tonight, and they are like have 3 different shipments instead of having one in 2 days. We see all the fast fashion. We see like the uprising of the fast fashion retailers like Temu, like Shein, all of these incredible market shares. Don't get me wrong, for DHL, we are very grateful for all of that. Our revenue is going up, EBITDA is incredible, all of this. But at the same time, we also have a responsibility as corporates to not waste the environment we're actually using. And if we can make a positive impact on consumer behaviorism by finding new ways, by actually utilizing digitalization to help people understand how their consumption is actually impacting this and improve the products we're offering, then it might have like a big impact.
I totally agree. Before coming here, I think about different solutions. Should we apply tax like Europe? But that just only create a higher CPI, which we don't like for the economic, especially developing country. And I will tell you the story of my 7-year-old daughter. One day she came back home after school. She didn't allow me to throw anything. She gave me the question, can we recycle that? Okay, you need to pay off for your question. Questioning mommy is not good. The next day, we went to the supermarket. She wanted to buy chips, very nice chips, very good. And she wanted to buy that. I tell her, that packaging cannot be recycled. She stopped buying. She gave up her decision. So that is 7-year-old girl. Going back to our customer at our retailer, we encourage them to buy the plant-based product. We cannot say them it's good for environment. We tell them, cancel potential, no cancel potential, you choose it. So I think that beside threat like carrot and the stick, we talked about the first discussion compared with the education. I agree, totally agree with education. We should do the education for new generation and keep reminding them. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in the Asia Pac we are growing. That's a good news, isn't it? But the bad news is that we have also become victims of our own success. What is that? So, Alan, you showed the number just now. Asia Pac, 31% of global CO2 emissions. I'm glad I took a picture of that because that's the thing I wanted. Okay, yeah. But, you know, at the end of the day, if we are not going to be such a prosperous region, such a wealthy, growing region, I think we will not feature so prominently, isn't it? Right? And now we're being featured for the wrong reason. But the good news is that I think we have maybe wasted a whole generation on such things, but hopefully the next generation, like what your daughter is saying, is that they'll be more aware, more instilled in the sense to say that, look, they need to change for the better of the next generation. right? So consumerism has to be put a stop, and maybe, right, the DHLs of today can say that, look, if you're going to deliver, then you maybe put a tag and say, you have just consumed X amount of CO2, right, to the individual. Then they'll think very hard and say, what does it really mean? Because right now we don't have that tag, right? We just get something, click, maybe buy, we expect to be delivered. Amazon Prime, for example, you're talking about, right? And sometimes you don't want it late, you want it to be on time. Why? Because you don't want to lose it to your peers and your contemporaries, right? You want to be on the same footing with them. So at the end of the day, I think the mind has to change. And so that's where I think, if I have a say, I would say government must come in to be the middle hand, right? The invisible hand to change some of these things. But unfortunately, most governments are afraid of, okay, sorry, I'll say this in this room, but after that I forget everything I said. But most governments are afraid of losing their elections, right? They're very afraid. I give you an example, okay? This is a very classic example. In my home country, I did one experiment, or we did one study with a big grocery chain. And the experiment, when they started, we came in the middle of the project, okay? When they started, they wanted to do for grocery. So their trial was very simple. 20 supermarkets, 20 supermarket outlets, to be fair, 20 cents a piece for a 19-inch bag. Wow, the numbers were very good. Everybody stopped buying, you know. Really, the numbers just dropped, okay? Then after 6 months of trial, they stopped the experiment and said, good, we can implement. Now, guess, what was the price that they wanted to charge for the plastic bag? In the trial was 20 cents a piece, right? Once the trial was over, 20 cents was out of the picture. They said we're going to be kind to the consumer, so they won't charge 20 cents, they charge only 5 cents. Seriously. So the whole thing to me was a failed exercise, right? Because why? You look at it, they say, oh, we do our part, we reduce the 28-inch, 32-inch, 19-inch and 17-inch bags, right? We just keep one size only. And then people still buy. Why? I tell you why. The logic, and I asked them, the consumers, okay, they say, we need those bags to dispose our garbage. So, dual function, right? Yeah, so that's what it is. So, humans are practical. So, the question then is, how do we highlight the practical aspect of what they're doing currently is harmful to the environment in the future? And that, I think, is critical.
Yeah. So my answer is that I have 2 daughters and I oppose any solution through population. So my solution is that I think that we have to educate the next generation. We educate in the way that we have to tell them there's no single solution to the environmental issues, and they also have to realize that there's some tensions, there's some trade-offs. My daughters in UK, if they want to see their grandparents, they had to trade off with the environment to fly from UK to Vietnam. So similarly, if they want to enjoy something, they have to trade with the environment. If they want to protect the environment, maybe there's something that they have to satisfy. And so we maybe try to educate the next generation to realize that there's no single solution there, and they have to realize there's trade-off there, and then they can make the wider decision when they grow up. Yeah.
I don't know if, as moderator, I'm allowed to give an answer myself, but one of the themes here has been educating the population on this. I think one thing that's going to help is us suffering the consequences of climate change. Because if one looks at all the projections about extreme weather and rising sea level, people will learn the hard way, when they see how this is impacting on their lives as well. But this is taking us some distance away from the decarbonisation of logistics. So maybe in the remaining time, we've got about 15 minutes left. We can maybe go back and look at some of the other levers we could pull, maybe to try to decarbonise. But I think there were a few other hands went up. So there's some other people who would like to ask a question. A gentleman in the middle there.
Hi, my name is Alex Philip. I'm doing research in Swiss School of Business Management. Prior to that, I was heading finance department for Kunannagal, South India. So my questions may be inclined to finance and cost saving. So Dennis was mentioning that Euro 2 to Euro 4 to 6, it's incurring costs and you have to pass on to the customer. My question is simple. Why can't we use the CSR funds to incentivize these sort of green energy movements and all. So if you use an electric truck, you will get at a lesser cost, which will be subsidized from the CSR fund. Or if you use a recycle or a reusable thing, package or something, why can't you subsidize from the CSR fund and motivate the use of green energy and sustainability? Thank you.
Yeah. All the microphones have moved down to this end.
Thank you for the question. I think you say incentivize, but that's just one side of the medal, right? Because the other side of the medal is if you incentivize one part of the public, you penalize the other part. So people don't want to feel that they're getting penalized because they're like not willing to do a certain thing, right? Also, it's consumer behavioralism, right? You want to, if you use online shopping, you perhaps don't know your size, but you want the comfort. So it means that you're actually like lowering the attraction of online shopping to some people by actually like ordering less. So you'll have businesses coming back to us and saying, oh, because of your business model, we're actually making less revenue. So that's kind of like the problem. That's why I say it's like the whole circular idea of bringing quick shopping experiences by having like a next day delivery, same day delivery, all of these kind of things. Having also green products, we can do all of this. We can also return green. But the willingness to pay a fair price for that is very, very low. Not just in Europe, not just in Southeast Asia. We've seen the study you've just you referenced as well. There is kind of like a matching to the study actually to what are consumers saying they're willing to pay for like a green experience, and then matched with what logistics providers actually like seeing in their numbers. The numbers are almost zero. Consumers, if they actually see there's a higher price for a green product, they will not go for that one. Even if the conscious says, it's the same thing when you go to a fast food restaurant. It asks you like, oh, do you want to donate 40p to XYZ? 40p is for most people not a lot of money, but most people will not say yes. They'll just say no, it's bothersome, it's cumbersome, I'll just go with the price I know. It's like $1.99 for a burger, right? It's like if it's $2.49 for a burger, different story. It's for a good cause. I know, but I don't. And it's the same thing, behavioralism, when it comes to Go Green and all of these other initiatives.
The higher price may be paid from the CSR from corporate social responsibility fund.
Thank you. I think that, when we look at this issue, and maybe it refers back to what I said in my own introduction, is that if you look how governments are formed in the various countries, the ministries tend to be functional. So you have Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Finance, and then Ministry of the Environment. And every one of them have their own slush funds to do subsidies, things like that. The problem that I have is that if it's just a Ministry of Environment that gives out support, it doesn't reflect the full picture because we don't see the full ecosystem. And this is where it's challenging, where if we really think and we're really serious about having this green agenda, it has to be embedded in all of the functions from the beginning. And then that's where you can see, yes, support policies or taxes or whatever, so you can see the full picture. Currently, it's so functionalized, and I think this is very similar to what we do when we were teaching logistics and supply chain, where we say it has to be integrated, but the first one who is not integrated is the government. So what you're saying is right, but that's only part of the picture, and we need to be able to have the full ecosystem of it in order to see what's the impact, do some simulation and all these things.
In the UK, they call that joined-up government, but it is, again, highly siloed. But if we take it to the next geographical level, the other problem is that there's little consistency in government policy within a region. And something we've not discussed at all is the role of organizations like UNSCAP and ASEAN and Asian Development Bank. So, I mean, at a regional level, do you sense that things are being better coordinated now than in the past? As this relates to decarbonising logistics.
Yeah. Okay, so just let me share with you what we see. So you have organizations like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, that for any project that they do related to transport, there's a number of safeguards. Not just the environment, but also diversity, inclusion, social, so on and so forth. But what do we actually see happening? So the World Bank come in, Asian Development Bank come in, talk with the country. So these are the requirements. This is what you need to do. The country say, okay, well, we'll think about it. And then after that, you have AIIB that comes in. I don't know if you know AIIB. It's a Chinese international bank. And the Chinese international bank, which is based on the same model as ADB, says, oh, you don't have to worry about the environment. We'll give you the money for that. So there's this type of competition. So yes, there are safeguards, but at the end of the day, the decision is made by the government looking at, okay, who is giving them the better deal at the end of the day. But I'm not saying bad things about AIIB, I'm just sharing their practices.
Okay, okay.
So, you know, I know you guys are recording this, so yeah, please.
Okay. Right. Yes.
Now you realize.
Yes. Yes. Anyone else want to take the risk of commenting on this subject? Yes. Right. But we can raise the geographical scope to the next level and look at this globally, because I think somebody mentioned CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU is going to introduce, so that imports into the EU will then incur a carbon tax depending on the carbon intensity of the exporting country. So initially that's only going to apply to some basic commodities like cement and steel and fertilizer, but after the 2030s it's going to be manufactured products as well, and we're not very clear as to how that will actually be implemented, because I mean, how do you work out the embodied CO2 in high value manufactured products as well? But you can understand why the EU is doing this, because if it doesn't do it, if it's got a carbon pricing system within the EU, the danger is you'll get carbon leakage, and carbon intensive companies will then relocate elsewhere in the world that doesn't have carbon pricing. So, but do you think that this is going to work, that CBAM is going to work, and it's going to globally achieve a system which will help us to decarbonize the global economy? That's a tough question to ask, to end with, but have you got a view on that?
Just to say that at the moment, those that are exporting steel, cement to Europe, they have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So the question will be, will we have a trade diversion happening mm-hmm. because of CBAM? Mm-hmm. Because not everyone in Southeast Asia is selling to Europe. And it reminds me a bit of at the turn of the previous century, when the U.S. started to do like the Harter Act for the maritime, for the shipping, the various ship owners from Europe decided not to go, so that isolated the country. So I don't know if we're going to see a repeat of that, but there's a risk. But for those countries that are nearer to Europe, it will have a lot, I would say, a lot higher level of impact than those countries that some of the, especially for the first 7 ones, mm-hmm. Probably not that significant for now.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, many companies, many countries simply regard this as a form of protectionism, and it will have to get approval by the World Trade Organization. So there are interesting times ahead on that. We've only got a few minutes left, so what I'd like to do is give you all a chance, really, to maybe. I mean, you were asked by a member of the audience to give your view on what the big mechanism is going to be that's going to help us to decarbonize logistics and supply chain. But what do you see as the biggest constraint? What is the biggest barrier, really, to us entering a world where we get onto the right trajectory, you know, to get our logistics emissions down to zero by, I don't know, 2040, 2050? You know, what are the big barriers that we have to remove? We could just go down the line, or if somebody would like to volunteer to go first. Any thoughts? You go first.
Great, thanks, Lynn.
Yes. So I think the most challenging now from the Southeast Asia perspective is the regulation. We had to be stable, have a stable regulation here. Yeah. I hope I still can go back to Vietnam.
I want to get clarification on your question.
Yeah.
Does that apply to the whole region, or are there some countries where you've got a problem with regulation? Is it more of a problem here in Vietnam than it would be in Thailand?
I'm Vietnamese, so I based on my experience in Vietnam.
Well, I'm not sure whether I agree that regulations or compliance is the right way to do it. My take is that, yes, we need some form of compliance to guide our behavior, right, in more ways than one. But I think it is necessary, but not sufficient. Right? At the end of the day, I think our mindsets must change to the point whereby we want to turn the region that we have currently into a better place for subsequent generations. Otherwise, all the things that we've taken the pain to build up will all soon be gone and wasted, right? Because, taking care of carbon and its associated emissions, they're not cheap. And trying to correct the pollutions that we see in our waters today is going to be a big headache for everybody concerned, right? Not just for our own pleasure, but also for livelihood and production, right? Because we depend a lot on the oceans.
I totally agree with you. Like, to reduce the carbon emission from 10 to 15%, the company can do immediately lean activity to reduce the overproduction and reduce everything. And the next that they can wait until the next 5 years to have a lower price of solar implementation, the SAF, other fuel, green. But talk about the consumer behavior, the overconsumption is our problem. People love the sea. People love going to the sea. People love going to the coral. But imagine that they go scuba diving and they step on the coral and they destroy those coral. So even when they say they love it, but they don't know that they innocently destroy everything. So I think that the biggest challenge is still the consumer behavior and perspective, and their willingness. Yeah.
I don't think there's one single constraint. I think it's a multitude of levels, right? I think to tackle the issue of 2030 or 2050, I think we have to do probably like 4 things. We have to reduce carbon emissions and the avoidance of carbon emissions. We have to leverage new technologies and innovations, what we have. We have to enable consumers, but also companies to utilize this. And then we have to develop new ways, because with the things what we have today, we know that the progress is very, very slow. So it's not one single constraint, it's more about how do we fill this toolbox and how do we apply them.
I think last but not the least, for me, it's really about this concept called mindfulness. What do I mean here is that we are all responsible. Anything that we do, and if we are aware of what we are doing, we know if it's good or not for the environment, but we also need to think about what can we do to also counterbalance, to find the middle path. So I go back a bit to, from a Buddhist religious philosophy, is we need to take the middle path.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for those contributions. I wonder maybe if the narrative in the past hour and a half has been a bit too negative, possibly. I remember meeting Nicholas Stern, who wrote the very influential report on the economics of climate change. And people had criticised him because his report was too optimistic. And he said, I can be as pessimistic as anyone else, but where does that get us, right? And a lot of climate scientists have been accused of having too negative a narrative and trying to intimidate the population into becoming lower carbon. And in the title of this session, it was challenges and opportunities. And maybe we haven't said enough about the opportunities, but maybe that's for another day. So, but anyway, thank you very much for all your contributions. I'd like you to show your appreciation to our panel. I hope you found this interesting.